K-12 teachers of Reddit, what is a story of a student you had who went on to surprise you with how much they later succeeded or failed in life? Not my story, but my grandma's. She was a middle school English teacher and had this one student who was problematic. He was well known as a troublemaker and a bully. My grandma was a pretty strict teacher, so she didn't take his crap. She had to take disciplinary actions on multiple occasions, so it's safe to say he was not a fan of her. But my grandma was always able to see his potential, and she didn't want him to waste his life. Flash forward about 35 or 40 years. This student got a hold of my grandma's email address and contacted her. In the email he stated how he has had a very troubled life and had past problems with the law. He then said that he remembered back to her English class and how she was the only teacher who ever pushed him to be a better student in person. It ended up that those memories gave him motivation to turn his life around. He cleaned up his life and was able to get and hold a job. He wanted to thank my grandma for being the only person who ever believed in him and pushed him to be a better person. It definitely made my grandma happy to know that, even if it was decades later, she was able to help give someone self-worth and a second chance at life. Johnny Depp went to my high school way before I did, but the chemistry teacher was the same guy, but much older by the time I got there. He'd always tell us how Johnny was always skipping school, didn't do well academically, and played guitar in the halls. His mom was supposedly always being called. One of my professors has this story. She is a creative writing professor. She went and got her MFA in writing with a few guys who were writing this play. She said that they goofed off and never took their work seriously, and they asked her to write with them. She figured them to be losers and turned them down. So now she's a creative writing adjunct professor, and her classmates, those guys, have their own animated series you might have heard of. South Park. Had a student who was one of the most undisciplined, uncontrollable people I had ever met. He probably had several undiagnosed learning disabilities and had no regard for any kind of social norms, both in interactions with teachers and peers. He would wander the halls, barge into classes that were not his own, and attempt to engage in conversation with teachers in the middle of their lessons. He would have loud outbursts, sometimes of song, sometimes just to hear the sound of his own voice. On a few occasions, he would remove his shirt in class and lewdly rub his nipples. This is just the stuff that immediately comes to mind. Every day this kid would act out in some new creative way. He also happened to be an extremely talented singer and performer, and last year, his junior year of high school, he auditioned for and got a role on a show on a streaming service. I'm hoping the tutoring they provide him is more effective than traditional schooling, and that he gets his behavior under control. Otherwise his success may not last long. Best friend and valedictorian I graduated with did not go to college. Had multiple full rides 1400 plus on the SAT, when the maximum was just 1600. She scored perfect on the math. She just wanted to live at the beach, so she did. Worked a crappy 9 to 5 and lived in a trailer. She's very happy. Success for her. Taught a very talented kid. Taught him in middle school and was a beast on the basketball court. He could dunk a basketball in the 6th grade. He never played a game because of his grades and was later shot in a drug deal. One of his buddies ended up getting a full ride to play football at a dividend. College. Promptly quit because he didn't like being told what to do all the time. My neighbor taught chemistry in high school for almost 10 years. In particular, she recalls a student of hers who got perfect scores on almost every test. She was a hard worker and could be seen constantly studying. Ironically, despite her being a nerd, she was pretty popular and had lots of people around her. 2 years later she failed her senior year. It was discovered she had multiple accounts of drug abuse and had run away from home. It was a huge scandal, as the school my neighbor worked in was a prestigious and highly competitive private school. To everyone's surprise, 2 years later she came back to the school. After going to rehab and therapy she was a whole different person. She repeated her senior year and managed to graduate with excellent grades. Now she's happily married after graduating from college. Not a teacher, but I have a relevant story. You know the show Scrubs? Well, the creator of that show went to my high school, and I was a big fan of the show. when it was still good, and I tracked down one of his teachers, specifically his creative writing teacher. He told me that his former student was a C student at best and was solidly mediocre. So that's kinda funny. I taught at a high school. I had one student who was incredible in school. She had an awesome family, involved in clubs, and was extremely shy. She was going to Brown or Princeton and wanted to be a civil engineer. Opened up Pornhub the other day and I'm pretty sure she's a cam show girl. If not, this chick has a doppelganger. I work in a delinquent youth placement. We'll call this student Bob for anonymity. Bob had problems, authority issues, substance abuse, aggression, raised in the streets in a city minority kid. Bob wasn't going to see the age of 30 if he didn't get arrested. Nothing out of the ordinary for our facility. Over months and months we get Bob doing better. SAC counselors, staff members, teachers, therapists. He's working as a student worker and making money. He earned his JED. He even enrolled in community college in his hometown. We were damn proud when he left our facility and got a part-time job between classes. Fast forward a couple months. One of our staff members does a recidivism check. Is Bob doing okay or in jail again? Bob was shot by a rival of Bob's former gang for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He died at the hospital. He wasn't even 20 yet. I had a student come mid-year to my 8th grade class because she was in the U.S. for medical treatment following an awful pickup accident in her country where she was dragged down the road. She lost most of one leg and the other from the knee down. Her first week she came in a wheelchair and became very popular since only she and a helper could use the school elevator. The rest of the year she graduated from wheelchair to crutches with prosthetic legs, then a cane, then was able to walk without help. She went camping with the class having no problems on uneven terrain. I saw her again after she graduated from high school and she told me how she now drove her nephews and nieces to school. I was so proud of her and all she had overcome. This is not mine, but my grandpa's. I don't know if the story counts, but I'll say it anyway. There was this child actor who needed to act like an architect in a movie he would be in. My grandpa was still teaching at the time and is an architect, so he had the kid in his class for a while to learn. That kid was Tom Cruise. Not a teacher, but went to school with a guy that had a 100% average because his mom baked cookies and did other things for the teachers, and if he got anything less than 100 she would complain about it to the profs. She also had him listed for several learning disabilities, which he didn't have, just so he could take like 2 weeks to write a 1-hour test. Obviously went home and cheated. He was on some special education plan that let him take all that time. He was genuinely a really smart guy too, but his mom put too much pressure on him. He got into the best university with a full ride, flunked out first year. Since then, he's dropped out of like 4 other unis after a semester in each. He now works full-time at a Tim Hortons as a cashier. It's sad but karma is a bitch, because his mom used to always put down other kids by saying stuff like you must feel really bad. Son's name got the highest average, and you were only second highest. Don't worry, not everyone can win. She single-handedly probably ruined his life. There is a kid I taught in an English center here in South Korea. His name was John, and it was for a debate class. John was good at debating, but weights are cool for school. He was in 7th grade or so, and was getting to that age where he didn't give a shit. I really wished he actually tried and released his potential, but alas, wasted. Come a few years later, and I run into him on the streets. I actually didn't recognize him, but he came up to me and was very excited. It was kind of surreal, because he was never really excited to see me. He thanked me for teaching him debate, and he had just won a national competition. I was very proud of him. Sadly, that's the only time I ever saw him again. Not a teacher, but I think I'd be one of those success stories. Growing up, my teachers all told my parents I'd never succeed or accomplish anything. My music teacher told my parents to take my instrument back to the store before paying too much for it, since I'd never be any good. We couldn't afford private lessons. In high school, the vice principal told my mom I wouldn't even manage to graduate and was destined to drop out and end up in prison. I did graduate on time, and now I'm a prosecutor. I have no criminal record, except one minor speeding ticket, have lived on 2 different continents, speak several languages, and I'm a soloist in a local orchestra. To those rare teachers who believed in me, thank you. To this day I have constant feelings of inadequacy, and I'm convinced I'm going to fail everything any second, but thanks to a few people urging me on, I dare to try. To those teachers and everyone else who said I'd never succeed, fuck you. You tried to destroy me and nearly succeeded. Thanks to you, I spent years afraid to even talk, let alone try to do things I wanted to do. I'm happy I finally stopped letting my fears control me. Not a teacher, but had a guy a few years ahead of me in HS. Dude was the closest thing to a genius I'd ever seen. Total recall, just absorbed information, and hung on to it. He got a perfect score on the ACT, and got into a pretty prestigious Midwestern University medical program. Last I heard he dropped out, after developing a coke problem, and can't hold a job down. There was a kid I grew up with who was a bully crazy kid. He was constantly in fights in elementary school. His mom was called almost every day, and he was on Ritalin 2x a day, and he was still a handful. 8th grade he suddenly decided not to be a psycho. He got great grades and studied hard, was a straight-A student all through high school. My family always joked that he was so smart he would either be a supervillain or the president. He had the potential for both equally. Now he's married with kids and helps people manage their money. If you had asked me in 6th grade what his life would have been like as an adult, I would say he would be in jail for aggravated assault. Lol. Unfortunately it doesn't surprise me anymore, but there are lots of stories about absolutely brilliant people with bad family situations who can't afford to go to college or other career program and have to work some entry-level job to support themselves without any help. I'm pretty sure uncooperative parents and a FAFSA has to do with some of the kids. I mean, it's sad for them, but it's also sad for the world, because we as a society are losing out on the amazing doctors and filmmakers and teachers, or whatever they would have been. My what would you do if you won the lottery? Dream is 1. Fund my own kids' college. 2. Pay off the house. 3. Create a scholarship program and track down some of my former students. Anyway, not that I want to imply they are failures, because they aren't able to yet reach their goals, but it's surprising that we as a society educate these kids for 13 years, and then when some of the best and brightest we have to offer need to borrow a bootstrap to bring them to their full potential, they find almost nothing to help them, and we are fine with geniuses escaping abuse and sweeping the floor at the grocery store. Because reasons, I guess. Might be not fit in here, but when my dad was young he was told by one of his teachers that he wasn't smart enough to do anything but drive a dump truck. He now has a PhD in chemical engineering and does research for and with companies all over the world. I'm very proud of my dad. Young girl, very smart but no Einstein. They removed her from her school and put her in the center-based gifted program for the super smart. The teachers there promptly ruined her, as they did all the kids in that program. None of them were truly challenged, given a curriculum that allowed them to pick and choose what they wanted to study, which taught nothing about hard work or slogging through the difficult parts, and brainwashed all the kids, their parents, and everyone else in society were the equivalent of low IQ monkeys compared to their genius, and not worth their respect. She graduated high school with high marks because they were pampered and indulged, but college, where it's actually hard and you actually have to study and people don't constantly praise you for being amazing. She lost her mind, couldn't keep up with the other students, didn't know how to work for grades, and convinced herself her high school BF would cheat on her if she didn't go home and be with him. She dropped a full ride scholarship in the first year. They broke up, of course, and she ended up managing a rap group that was going nowhere, fell into drugs and a bad crowd, and now works it as a cashier. I used to work for a company that took kids on wilderness trips for 3 to 4 weeks to teach them life skills as an alternative to juvenile detention. Overall positive experience, and I really think the organization turned some kids' lives around. However, one course I instructed was the worst. Terribly behaved kids, terrible instructor team, terrible weather events. At the end, I kinda feared that the kids left worse off than they arrived. 4 months later, I was in the same area finishing another course that was 100% more successful. I was meeting with the local probation officer when one of the kids from the terrible course stopped in to see her unannounced. He needed her to sign papers because that was the day he was getting off probation. I cried on the way home, knowing that he made that happen on his own because he's a good kid and that the course I instructed didn't fuck him up. But I know that not all the students had his success.